A panicked Assad transfers key intelligence to save his life. The perpetrator behind a Russian general's assassination caught. And a short-term ceasefire extended at the last minute. This and more on the Dangerous Waters podcast. This is the Dangerous Waters podcast, where we dive deep into dangerous waters. I'm your host today, Alex, and we have a lot to talk about. Let's get started. Our first topic of the day, we have Bashar al-Assad, former ruler of Syria, who is now in Moscow, but in a desperate bid to ensure his safety, according to reports, he actually sent key intelligence and military data to the Israelis in the hopes that they wouldn't shoot his plane down as he was leaving the country. Now, this is huge because the implications behind such an action show that despite the Russians being in the scene, on the ground, they were inadequate in being able to protect Assad. Assad knew that major power players in the region, such as Turkey and Israel, were strong enough to the point that he was personally willing to give up data to his enemies in the hopes that they wouldn't kill him as he was leaving the country. So really what this shows is that Israel has now become a major power center in the Middle East, so much so that even enemies are willing to exchange information in the hopes that they do not get targeted. They understand the power of the Israeli airstrike. They understand what kinds of technical prowess Israel has. They've seen that prowess at work over the past few years during the Hamas and Hezbollah conflicts. They've seen the kinds of power that Israel has been able to assert even in Yemen, so far away from Israeli borders. Israel is still able to strike Yemen in major port cities. But let's talk about what was actually found in that information that Assad gave. He apparently gave, quote, the location of weapons depots, missile systems, and warplanes as a guarantee that Israel would not target him during his flight. This was first reported by a Turkish newspaper and was then echoed by TASS, which is a Russian state-run media source. For our next story today, we have the perpetrator behind a Russian general Kirillov's assassination, who was actually just caught by the work of the FSB in Russia. This man was a citizen of Uzbekistan, 29 years old. He was recruited by Ukrainian Special Forces, the SBU in particular. The fascinating aspect about this is that this was not a homegrown Ukrainian spy. This was a recruit, a temporary recruit, and it shows the power and the appeal that the SBU and Ukraine has, even in the face of major propaganda from Russian state media and the Russian apparatus in general. To give you a sense of what kind of incentives this perpetrator was given to perform this act, he was allegedly promised $100,000 in US dollars, as well as a free citizenship to an EU country. That right there is a very big part of why so many people are willing to do these kinds of things or willing to go beyond what's reasonable. Because when you have a Russian passport, it severely limits your access to the rest of the world, especially in many developed nations, such as in other parts of Europe and North America. You don't have visa-free travel. You have a very restrictive travel process. It's hard to work in other countries with a Russian passport. So when you're in these kinds of situations, you're young, you don't really have that much of a future for you, but you do know that if you do this, you have just opened up pretty much every door you could possibly open into the world, knowing that you have this level of access to Europe, to the United States. It looks very attractive. It looks like it's from the legal process, you have the passport in hand, and Ukraine is definitely a country capable of performing these types of services. So it's a strong incentive, and it's one that this man thought he could get. for performing such a assassination on a Russian general. As for the technical aspects of the killing, how it was performed was he did rig explosives on the bottom of an electric scooter, so that was confirmed, same as yesterday. However, they also uncovered a car which was found to have a Wi-Fi camera rigged on it so they could see when the general was entering or leaving his building. This was his building of residence, and there was a remotely detonated trigger for the explosive rigged on the electric scooter, and that was how they were able to perform the assassination. For our next news story, we have a short-term ceasefire between Turkey and US-backed Kurdish forces in Syria. A short ceasefire which is probably not going to work out in the long run, but for now, there was an extension to the ceasefire which will last until the end of this week. As of now, we have seen a massive Turkish military buildup on its southern border in the potential for an advance to take over Kurdish occupied lands in Syria and consolidate their gains. Turkish has a very strong expansionist policy in the region, and they are willing to go through any cost, really, to achieve their territorial gains. This includes potentially putting 900 U.S. service members at risk during their invasion, as well as probably genocide or at least strong massacres of the Kurdish population, consistent with what they were able to achieve during the Armenian genocide. So we can all hope that this ceasefire will continue to stay in effect, that U.S. and Turkish diplomats are very urgently trying to solve this issue between the two parties. These are major conflicts of interest, and especially between two NATO countries. Not a good look for the NATO alliance. So let's see and let's hope that there does not end up being war breaking out in the region. Let's talk about what is going on at home. Our first story, we have Trump, which explicitly called for Canada's admission to the United States. A very interesting development, especially coming from what originally people thought were jokes about Governor Trudeau. But it looks like Trump is actually taking this proposal very seriously, and he is willing to legitimately put Canada into the United States as our 51st state. According to Trump on Truth Social, he says, quote, "No one can answer why we subsidize Canada to the tune of over $100 million a year. Makes no sense. Many Canadians want Canada to be the 51st state. They would save massively on taxes and military protection. I think it is a great idea. 51st state," with 4 exclamation points at the end. I've alluded to this in a previous episode, but I do believe that eventually, at least in the next 1 to 200 years, there is a very strong possibility of Canada eventually making its way into the Union. That being, Canada has so many natural resources, a lot of rare earth metals, uranium, oil, gas, anything, you name it, Canada has it. And what they don't have, though, is the expertise and the manpower to extract those natural resources. Eventually, as the earth becomes more scarce, as people use up more and more of the limited non-renewable resources that we have, Canada will become a gold mine, literally and figuratively, for future expansion and future securing access to those resources. The United States will most likely still continue to be a strong economy, will have the expertise, the knowledge, and the resources to expand those sorts of operations in Canada to drill out and extract those resources. Right now, as we're going into further unstable times and the earth becomes more and more depleted, this is an increasingly likely scenario in which the US and Canada will have to be a joint body in order to ensure the access to those materials. Let's talk about the drones that have been invading New Jersey and invading the media space over the past week or so. There was a new theory related to these drones, saying that they were actually part of a search operation to find missing radioactive materials. Now, we have new confirmations from the Department of Energy, as well as other quote-unquote related officials, which do state that this is not the case. They are not looking for radioactive materials. So essentially, what started this dilemma was on December 5th, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission issued a statement saying that during transport, there has been a piece of medical equipment with small traces of radioactive material which was lost. However, the actual piece of equipment was found eventually. It was just misplaced while being in transit to another destination. FedEx had accidentally misplaced it, but it has been found, and it is not a safety threat. It is not the reason why there are drones coming out in New Jersey. And if you really think about it, why would they need civilian drones for this type of thing? The U.S. has some of the most powerful surveillance technology around the world in which they can detect nuclear tests going on, nuclear radiation, large scale, all around the world. This is something that the United States absolutely excels in. We've built up decades worth of some of the best technology in the world when it comes to detecting radioactive signatures, when it comes to detecting enemy countries testing nuclear weapons or nuclear materials. So why would they need these drones to do that? I don't know. It just didn't make sense to me. And this clarification further proves that the drones are not there because of potential leakage of radioactive material. Finally, for our last major U.S. headline, we have turmoil for Tulsi Gabbard. Her situation is uncertain. She was picked by Trump to be the next Director of National Intelligence, which is a very important intelligence role that oversees all of the intelligence agencies, including the FBI, CIA, DHS, and others. And currently, she is not really in a good position to potentially be the next DNI. She has to be confirmed by a majority of the Senate, and there have been many holdouts going on. Unlike Pete Hegseth, which earlier faced another uphill battle just as powerful as hers, but he was able to sort of overcome those obstacles. He was able to reassure senators who were against him at first that he would be for their interests, and he had productive conversations every day on the Hill, and he had a good attitude about it. However, it looks like Tulsi Gabbard is not facing the same types of positive assurances. We have at least 8 Republican senators who told the Trump transition team that they still have reservations about Tulsi Gabbard due to her either refusing or being unprepared for a lot of questions, especially tough questions that were asked about her during meetings on Capitol Hill. However, not all hope is lost. She still has a lot of time. She has around a month and sometimes even more to secure the votes of the senators. And in fact, the rejection of a presidential cabinet member from their post has been a very rare occurrence, the last time being George Bush Sr. in 1989 when one of his cabinet selections were rejected. Outside of that, everyone else has been confirmed, which shows that a lot of this is really just political quarreling. But Tulsi Gabbard does face an uphill battle still, although she might still be able to secure the position if she puts in the effort and is able to somewhat appease the senators in question. Let's get into rapid fire news. Israel has announced the occupation of Mount Hermon in Syria until at least the end of 2025, in which they can ascertain the intentions of the new Syrian government. Oil from the sunken Russian cargo ships has already started an ecological disaster. U.S. officials announced hundreds of North Korean casualties, including deaths and wounded, in the war in Ukraine. House Speaker Mike Johnson faces another critical juncture in the House as he requires Democratic votes to pass an incoming spending bill. And Luigi Mangione was indicted for the assassination of the CEO of United Healthcare. With that being said, thanks for sticking around to the end of the Dangerous Waters podcast. If you liked it, feel free to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. And as always, I'll see you all in the next one.